Welcome to September's Business Outlook Survey press conference call. My name is Catherine Dibling, Senior Media Representative, and with me today is Senior Economic Analyst Mike Trebbing, who will be answering questions from reporters Kathleen Madigan of Dow Jones and Ellen Freilich of Reuters about what our manufacturers said this month. And a few other reporters may be joining us later. Mike Trebbing will now give a brief summary on today's report. Mike?
Good morning. Indicators from the Business Outlook Survey in September suggest continued weakness in the region's manufacturing sector. Although the survey's General Activity Index recovered somewhat from August, indicators for general activity, new orders, and shipments have been negative for at least the last 2 months. Firms maintained steady employment levels this month, but average work hours fell notably again. Firms reported that prices for their own manufactured goods had declined and that cost pressures have continued to lessen in recent months. And despite the evident weakness in activity over the past 2 months, firms expect growth in their manufacturing business over the next 6 months, although the degree of confidence is still below the levels in the first half of the year.
Thank you, Mike. Questions? Ellen Freilich, Reuters.
Yes, could you just repeat those components that were negative for the last 2 months?
Well, general activity, new orders and shipments have all been negative for the last 2 months. We've had a new orders index that was negative back in July as well. So on balance, the broad indicators are still slightly below zero, suggesting some considerable weakness, but the overall activity index improved a little bit closer to zero, more like steady activity.
Thank you.
Kathleen Madigan, Dow Jones.
There seems to be a worsening in pricing power among the manufacturers. Have they commented on that? Do they give a reason for it?
No, most of the focus has been in the last couple months on the forecast or in particular comments about the special questions that we've asked. A few firms have indicated that nobody's raising prices at this point. No comments on the cost side, but we have seen that cost index or prices paid index come down steadily over the last 6 months or so. So the costs are not as the pressures aren't as great as they were earlier in the year, and as you pointed out, more firms reporting price declines than price increases, or price increases, more declines than increases for their own products, and that's been the case for several months now.
Follow-up questions? Ellen Freilich, Reuters.
None right now.
Kathleen Madigan.
Can you talk a little bit more about the employees? I mean, the employment seems to be holding steady, but the decline in the work week, is that a leading indicator of what might happen to the employee index?
Not a leading indicator, I think. I think it's consistent with the weak numbers we saw over the last 2 months of the summer. It was weak last month also, with fewer hours reported, according to this diffusion index for both August and September, and it's consistent with the story that's been told in the overall indicators for the last 2 months. Looking 6 months ahead, we're still seeing positive diffusion indexes for future employment and work hours, although only about a fifth of the firms expecting employment increases over the next 6 months, but still some positive news on the forecast.
Any other follow-up questions?
Mike, you said positive indexes on what were those related to the labor market for the next 6 months?
We're still seeing expectation of employment growth over the next 6 months, with about 22% of the firms expecting increases in employment. and 24% expecting employment work week to rise. So, and positive readings on all of the six-month indicators for activity, shipments, and new orders. Although the degree of optimism has tapered off the last few months and is lower than it was in the first half of this year. And there was some evidence of that in our special questions too, where we asked about production levels for the fourth quarter, what was expected, and most of our firms are saying that they're expecting slower growth in production in the fourth quarter over their results for the third quarter. So that's consistent also with the expectations indicators for the general survey.
Any other follow-up questions?
No.
No, thank you.
Hey, thank you for joining us today, and we'll talk to you again in October.
All right, thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Now, to follow up on the press conference, I'm going to ask Mike Trebbing, Senior Economic Analyst, a few more questions about the survey. Let's talk a little bit about the special question. You touched on it briefly, but can you get into more depth and detail on the answers?
Right. The special questions this month ask firms about their expected production for the 3-month quarter ending this month in September. And they were also asked about their expectations for production in the fourth quarter compared to the third quarter. And what we found was that about 50% of the firms expected actual growth in their total production for the third quarter, where about 36% expected some decline. So increases edged out decreases for the production growth for the entire third quarter. Although the results showed that there was a great dispersion in the rates of increase or decrease across the panel. And the average growth rate was only about 0.6% for the quarter, so that's a slimmer growth rate than we had gotten last month or last year when we asked the same question. And when we asked them about the fourth quarter, somewhat surprisingly, we had 48% of the firms expecting a deceleration in growth in production. Only 24% expecting acceleration in production for the fourth quarter. So as I mentioned in the press conference, that's also consistent with the answers we got about expectations for business and shipments and orders over the next 6 months. The levels of the optimism have diminished somewhat in the last few months compared to the beginning of the year.
Now, is production typically slower in the fourth quarter and the third quarter? Seasonal changes?
No, all of the data is adjusted for seasonal variation. So our survey numbers should be adjusted for those kind of effects. And in our regular survey, we don't specifically ask about production. We summarize firms are asked about general activity and shipments and new orders, and so production is not one of our specific questions. So this survey provides a little bit better comparison maybe against other national measures of production.
Okay. Let's segue a little bit back to the General Activity Index. Last month it was negative 7.7, and this month it's negative 0.7, which is an increase, indicating flat or steady activity, as you said in the press conference. But there were predictions by the press, Bloomberg, Reuters, Dow Jones. Some of them said they expected 3, so expectations weren't met. What can you explain about the negative 0.7? What does steady mean? What does flat mean?
The reading is so close to zero that there's balance on both sides, increases and decreases, and general activity is a pretty general question. But when we actually talk to firms, how they interpret that question, they all have their own variables that they look at in their own firm to give an overall appraisal of health of their business situation. Sometimes it's orders, sometimes it's production plans, sometimes it's a weighted average of all of these things. So it's kind of a composite, if you will, of the firm's appraisal of general business conditions facing their own companies month to month, and the fact that the index is suggesting little change from the prior month. We use the words steadying or stable levels of activity, and although new orders and shipments are slightly negative, that it's close enough to zero to say it's not improved. It's still negative, but not as bad as it could otherwise be.
Okay, thank you, Mike. You've just been listening to the Business Outlook Survey press conference call and a conversation with Mike Trebbing, our Senior Economic Analyst, and I am Catherine Dibbling, Senior Media Representative. Next month's Business Outlook Survey will be posted on our website on Thursday, October 21st at 10 a.m.